Alrighty, so we are live. Thank you to everybody that is just coming in and joining us today. We are going to be talking about mental health today with Professor Steve Joordens from the University of Toronto Scarborough. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Dee.
So, as we said, today is the beginning of Mental Health Awareness Week, and we have all been going through so much when it comes to this current pandemic and coping with the various feelings of anxiety and depression and all of the things that come with it, especially in self-isolation. So what we've been doing over this past week is we've asked all our readers and listeners to send in questions for Professor Joordens, and he's going to answer them now live. We're just going to give people a little bit of time to come and join us today. So in the meantime, I should introduce myself. My name is Dilshad Burman, and I am a web writer for City News and 680 News, and I will be moderating this chat today. Like I said, we've already got a ton of great questions for Dr. Joordens, but we're also going to take your questions live. So feel free to submit them in the Facebook comments below this post. If you feel like you need to be anonymous, that's completely understandable. We also have a link in the description of this video, and you can submit your questions there anonymously. So Professor Joordens, I think we should get started now. Are you good to go?
Yep, good to go.
That's right. Wonderful. Okay. So let's start with the first question we have here from Mary. She says, how does one stay mentally strong during this pandemic if you already suffer from mental health issues? She feels like it just worsens the symptoms.
It's really unclear whether it does. Now it certainly may for a person, so I don't want to diminish her feeling. If it does for her, it does. It's been an interesting question of, is this extra hard on people who've already had, let's say, anxiety disorders? And it seems to be mixed reviews so far. Some of them kind of say, it's nice to have friends that they now feel like other people understand their world a little bit and understand what they've been dealing with. And in some cases, they are even better equipped than the rest of us in the sense that they have been, learning how to manage their anxiety for a while. But certainly for some people who are already, feeling a lot of pressure and tenseness, this ambiguity could make it worse. So let me just say that as we talk today, think of me like a physical trainer as opposed to a medical doctor. The physical trainer is the guy that tries to tell you exercises you can do so that you ultimately don't have to go to the medical doctor. And so I'm going to be able to speak on that. If you are really feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling like, things are really kind of coming down on you and you need some assistance to get through it, there is that 211 number. And I would recommend people connect with that to find, appropriate help for their situation. If you're feeling it's over the top, if you're feeling it's not quite, then I think we can talk about some things you can do to kind of help you keep in balance so that you don't get to that point.
So I should mention that Professor Joordens actually created an online course called Mind Control, dealing with your mental health during COVID-19. And so when he refers to his course, that's the one he's talking about. And I should have mentioned that earlier. That is why he is particularly suited to answer your questions today. So we'll go on to the next question. There's a few questions we've gotten about grief and dealing with grief. One of them is from Amy, and she says, how do I cope with mourning and loss with little to distract me? And the other is from Mimi, who says, how does one, again, handle the grief of losing someone in this time, especially when you can't grieve together, because there's so much catharsis in grieving together?
That is one of the horrible parts of this whole situation, is that our normal reaction to stress, to anxiety, to grief, to trauma is to connect with other human beings emotionally. And that's most obviously kind of apparent in like a hug, one of those true hugs where you're just telling the person how much you love them by how you're hugging them. And that's the kind of thing, when we imagine a funeral service, that's what that's about, is a bunch of people saying to this person, you have a lot of love, you have a lot of support, there are a lot of people who care for you. And this has just kind of pulled that away from us. And so it becomes very tricky. I even think of the people in Nova Scotia, for example, that had such a horrific event. I'm sure they wanted to come together as a community. Our challenge now is to find ways of emotionally connecting without physically connecting. And, you know, I would say things like a good old phone is a powerful device that we've kind of neglected. We've sort of bought into all these shallow interactions on texts and sharing and liking. This might be a time to, you know, call some of those people closest in your life, other people who knew that person, have a little bit of a celebration of their life. That's what we all do in these funeral situations, to try to deflect from the grief and talk about how great the life was. So I would certainly say, you know, maybe have a little bit of a phone call party, maybe encourage other people to do it as well, and literally reach out and connect. And another point, though, that was made in that first question is, how do you distract yourself from the grief? And in fact, a large part of my course is about that. I mean, I'm more about distracting from the anxiety, but that's kind of the story, is these negative states, we can't live in them. And I call the course Mind Control. This is May the 4th, like May the 4th be with you. It's kind of like a Jedi. You know, you can learn to take control of the thoughts in your head by being mindful about what's there. And if it is grief and grief and grief and grief, there are things you can do to kind of change the channel on your mind by engaging in certain activities. And so just one quick thing I'll say there is, we probably all have an activity that absorbs our mind when we start doing it. It could be reading for some, it could be, for me, it's writing songs in GarageBand, whatever it is. Find those activities and think of them as medicine. Like when you need a break, just say, okay, I am now going to go into this other world and I'm going to escape the anxiety, or I'm going to escape the grief. And those become very powerful, powerful activities. So find them and use them.
That's a really great suggestion. We talked about this when we talked about our productivity during the pandemic, and that's a really great suggestion. I think finding something that distracts you enough to take you away from it for a little while. Okay, let's move on to the next question. These are more parenting related. SKJ asks, dealing with kids, work, and everything around the house is pretty much 24/7. The parental guilt of not doing enough for the kids never goes away. How do you deal with that, and how should we be changing that perspective so that we're not always beating ourselves up?
Yeah, I mean, it is such a, it's like we've been lucky to have people in our lives that have done certain things for us, and we haven't necessarily realized how critical it was to be able to sort of be away from our kids and be our professional selves for a while. And now suddenly that professional self is gone for many people, or it's not gone, and yet you're still expected to become the teacher and the sort of full-time, keep your child occupied person. Yeah. It's a big ask. It's a big, big ask. So, I mean, the first thing to realize is there's a lot of people going through it. If you feel guilty that you're not doing enough, you are not alone. There are a lot of people feeling that same way. It's an impossible situation. So, you know, that's one thing about sort of trying not to beat yourself up. I will say, if you can get around to actually becoming your child's teacher, which is a tricky thing. You know, we're not used to doing it. Many of us don't feel equipped to do it. In fact, sometimes you may feel more like you're going to learn with your child than you're going to teach your child. And I think that's a really good mindset. I think to walk in with your child and say, what do we have to learn today? Let's work through this together. You may find that that's a really positive vibe you get. You know, usually we are the cops for our kids. We tell them what they can't do and blah, 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 and we're setting the rules and all this. That teacher vibe is a really kind of fun, showing your child things that they haven't seen before, watching them kind of learn and grow. And so I know how much stress everybody's under. And I know I don't want to make it sound panaceic, but if you can try to, you know, not beat yourself up, not try to be the teacher, just be there with your child in a learning environment and learn together, it may turn out to be a silver lining. It may be something that after this COVID situation, you miss those sorts of interactions. So I would suggest you just kind of be open to that. But at the same time, on the beat yourself up, yeah, it's a ridiculous ask. So I don't think anybody, you know, you see these beautiful scenarios of somebody who's doing all of this stuff. If those people exist, they're a tiny, tiny portion. Most of us are fighting our way through this, especially those of you with young kids. So, you know, just know that. It's a big thing.
That's lovely. There's another very similar question actually from Meg, but she's asking for coping techniques. She says, as a mother of 2 small children, I find myself going through waves of serious anxiety, which has caused me to have a heart arrhythmia. Can you recommend coping techniques on how to manage working from home, homeschooling, keeping a house running, not to mention the uncertainty of the world in which I already worry about my children's future.
Yeah. So it's so tricky, and that uncertainty. I mean, we don't even know the depth of the uncertainty yet. We're just dealing with the health thing, and we don't know what the world is. So that is why we are all feeling anxious and stressed. That is why we all need a break from it. Now I worry always when I give advice, because I know some of the advice is just not doable for some people. Like if you're a single parent, what I'm
Right.
about to say is going to be tricky, but I'll say it nonetheless. If it's possible, try to get some you time. So if you can negotiate with, if there's another guardian in the household, hopefully you can say, listen, I need 2 hours where I'm going to sit on a Zoom meeting with my friends with a glass of wine, and just kind of be me, or I'm going to read a book or something. And during that time, the kids are yours. And you're going to commit to say, you're going to take them. And then at another time, I'll do the same for you.
Yeah.
That sort of, trading off of stuff rather than both of you trying to drive yourself crazy all the time. Better to have one person a little more crazy and somebody getting a break for a moment.
Right.
And then it is trick to find that break. So the one other thing I want to mention, part of that course that I offer, which is a free online course, by the way, involves guided relaxation. And especially if you're getting so anxious that you're feeling that heart arrhythmia and stuff, I would suggest just look online. You don't have to use mine. You can find lots of guided relaxation audio tapes and lay down while your partner's taking care of the kids. That's their job for a while. Lay down and just listen to what it says and feel what it's like to relax your body. And that's what that's all about. When you really feel what it feels like to be truly relaxed, and these things will show you that, then you can get back there a little quicker. Once you kind of get familiar with that place, it's a place you can travel to more quickly. And so you can actually learn to push your body into a relaxed state. It's a skill. It takes time. You got to work on this repeatedly, but that, if you're feeling that level of physical manifestation, you want to push your body into a relaxed state. You cannot be both relaxed and anxious at the same time.
Right.
So rather than saying I need to be, stop being anxious, if you can say, okay, be relaxed, that will push the anxiety out in a much more effective way. So I would suggest that maybe she look into some of those guided relaxations. If it's getting very serious, 211. For sure, reach out to somebody. Yeah.
We've actually had a couple of questions regarding these kind of physical manifestations of stress. Xenia also asked us, she says she's finding that her skin is breaking out, her hair is falling. That's how anxious she is. I personally, all of my stress manifests physically, whether it's breathlessness, whether it's TMJ, my jaw starts clicking. Everybody has their own thing. And that's a very real thing, right? Physical manifestations of that stress. So would you suggest, guided meditation, that kind of thing, to handle the physical symptoms?
So there is, just to back up what you say, work from Hans Selye years ago in Montreal showed everything that you described is absolutely true. That just something like a chronic worry can give rise to rashes and all sorts of physical manifestations, especially skin, hair kinds of things. Just so you understand that, I mean, what's going on in your body is it feels the threat and it wants you to either fight that threat or run away from it. And we're in the situation where it's hard to do either. So it just hums along there and it's on our mind all the time. What we really need to learn is how to get it off our mind for periods of time. And we talked about guided relaxation. That's one way to learn how to drive your body into relaxation. Another way is to become very mindful about the things that you're engaging in your day and the effect they have on your anxiety level. For example, are you watching too much news? We all can get addicted to the news right now because we want information and it gives us information now and then. But every moment the news is on, your brain is hearing that you are under threat. And so you're feeding that anxiety response. So if you can make that sort of 2 half-hour hits during the day when you check in to see what's new, and then if you can sort of change your mind after you watch the news, so watch something else that brings you somewhere else, that brings your mind somewhere else. So don't watch the news and go for a walk. Watch the news, watch Just for Laughs, Montreal or something, whatever it is, then go for a walk. You will have pushed the news out of your mind and that'll make the walk a better event. So you can learn little tricks like that about just sort of tailoring your environment to be full of things that will fill your mind with at least something else than COVID, and maybe even something good. So and I'll just mention quickly on there, I like to mention a couple of activities like singing, dancing, even aerobic activity. These things have real mojo. So they're more than just an escape. They are a medicine. So things that make you laugh, things that make you dance, things that make you sing. If you can find an excuse to do that, my favorite, of course, is karaoke with your smart TVs. They all have karaoke built in.
Yes.
If you need a break, if you have your kids and you're going crazy, do karaoke with your kids. It's a good way to sing, to laugh, to maybe dance, and that's sort of medicine. So that's a really powerful thing to do.
Absolutely. I can attest to that. Big dancer over here.
Yeah.
Love it. Takes me out of the moment, keeps me happy for hours after. So definitely I can totally attest to that.
Cool.
Okay, let's move on to another question. This is more sort of job related, and for all the people that have either lost their jobs or are searching for jobs. B asks, how does one deal with anxiety that comes with the stonewall silence of job searching during the COVID-19 pandemic? Nobody's replying. There's applications, there's all of these listings on Indeed and on LinkedIn, and you apply and you apply and you apply, and nobody's responding.
Yeah. It's got to be a tough time for that. I mean, there's that. I always got to learn this saying better, but to sort of learn those things you can control and those things that you can't control. And in this situation, I think everybody is kind of holding their breath, seeing what the post-COVID world looks like. So it's a very tricky time for any employer to be hiring. Well, I mean, there's certain areas where there actually is a boom because of COVID, but other than those areas, it's tough. And so that's almost one of those things you have to, mentally tell yourself that this is going to be very difficult, which is no reason not to keep doing it, not to keep sending the things in, but just to do so with a certain expectation that, I'm going to have to get really lucky for something to stick. I'm still going through this process, but it's probably, you might want to mentally tell yourself it's probably going to be a month or two before that's going to be, a very viable way of finding a job. And, what else could I do? So here's a situation where you might say, okay, I will work on personal development. And there are these places like Coursera.org, edX, Udemy, all of these, LinkedIn, I think does some of this stuff now, where you can actually work on upgrading your credentials, perhaps. And so you might not be able to get a job now, but you can increase the likelihood that when people are hiring again, you are attractive. And so that will feel like, I'm not just sitting and waiting. I'm actually preparing. I'm getting ready for when they're ready. And I think that's one way to kind of manage your anxiety and feel like you're not, a big part of anxiety is to not feel like a victim, to feel like you're doing something, because that's what anxiety screams at us.
Yes.
And that we're having some control over how this all plays out. So personal development may be a way for that. It also gives you something when you wake up in the morning. Oh yeah, I'm going to work on whatever. When you go to bed at night, oh yeah, I did this. We've talked before about, don't do that if it's going to add more stress to your life. But if it's done right, if it aligns with, like if it's career growth and it aligns with a career you really want, then you're probably interested in that anyway. And as long as it feels like it's reducing your stress and anxiety, then that's what I would recommend in that situation.
That's really good advice, actually. Yeah, just preparing for the time ahead. At least that way you feel like you're doing something and that you're sort of, building yourself up to something.
Yeah. And you can, by the way, you can also imagine that fitting into your cover letter where you actually tell a business, what have I been doing for the last 2 months when I've been well, this is what I've been doing. Right. And, that's what a lot of these companies want to see, is that you're somebody that's about personal growth, that you actually, want to develop and be a great employee. So being able to say, that's how I spent my COVID, that could be a powerful signal that could help you land that job.
Absolutely. Okay. Moving on to some questions from seniors. We have one from Senior Gal who says, for normally independent seniors, how does one deal with the sudden shift in energy to helpless potato? I'm quoting, being dependent on family for grocery drop-offs, etc., when you were doing it all by yourself all this time. And also how to deal with separation anxiety, because normally living alone is not a problem, but living alone under these conditions, she says, feels like prison and is very distressing.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really tough situation. Let me give you one thing for context, just to think about this. One of the things in intro psych that we know there's cultural differences in is how we usually treat the aged. In the more Eastern cultures, our elders live with us in the same home, and they typically have responsibilities and duties to do as part of the home, and they tend to be mentally much more healthy. In Western societies, we detach sometimes ourselves from our elderly family members, and they sometimes feel more lonely, which isn't surprising, perhaps. Now we have COVID that, you know, adds that layer and again removes their sense, just as she described, of control, of agency, of whatever. And so now, yeah, you really, I think we really have to think about these people. And if you know people like that in your life, call them on the phone, make it a regular ritual, part of maybe what your family does. I recommend families adopt people, just whoever could use that connection. And you can tell your family, you know, we're calling this person to help them. In fact, you'll be helping your family too. That if your kids feel like they're doing something good to help in this situation, it will help their mental health, but it will also help the person we reach out to. So, you know, I would say two things to this person. Number one, reach out, shamelessly reach out to people, call them on the phone. If you're a Zoom person, go ahead and use Zoom, but a phone's perfectly fine. Keep connecting with people anytime you're feeling a little down. The other thing I would say, and this can work, the person can do this themselves, or if you know someone that's older that you're worried about their mental health, find the music they loved when they were like 16 to 18 years old, make up a little playlist and play that. So if it's you, play that music you love. What you will find is it will take you there. It will bring you out of your current situation to when you were a 16-year-old and having those fun. And it's a great way to use the environment to put in your head positive things. And you won't have heard these songs for a long time. So every song will be like, oh, yeah. And then and you'll have memories, positive memories, and maybe it'll allow you to escape your living room for a while, even if you're not physically escaping. So that's one recommendation I would make in that realm.
That's awesome. I love that. Definitely, music definitely has that power to just transport you to wherever, for sure, for sure. Let's see, what else do we have here? This is sort of a more of, I guess, a mental health awareness question. Sheehan asks, what is the best way to raise awareness about self-care and mental health and encourage people to be proactive rather than wait till they're struggling and then it's really hard to cope? Because there's still so much stigma about mental health, about therapy, about actually going to therapy. What is the best way to maybe encourage people to, you know, seek out help?
So that's one of the things that I think is special in sort of a good way about the current situation. I'm big on the silver linings. We all are now. Kind of find those silver linings and embrace them. And one of the silver linings now is that we used to be in a situation where we would talk about mental health as though it was somebody else, and as though it was like a disease like cancer, that, you know, that person has that issue. Certain people have it, other people don't. Right now, we all feel anxious. So we all know what that feeling is like. And this is a great chance for, first of all, to dispel a lot of those senses. So one of the things I try to do in my course is convince you that anxiety is not a sickness. It is something that comes out of our biological machinery, and it's there to help us survive short-term threats. And so once you kind of understand what that system's doing, then it makes sense that it would be wrongly active right now, and that a lot of us would feel this tension. And so it's a good chance to kind of think about mental health like a physical trainer would think about physical health, and say, okay, this is a time that's challenging for us. And so we want to be as strong as we can be. Can we learn some things we could be doing and practicing now that would make us strong in the face of these challenges? And, you know, literally that's what the course is. And the big, I think, take home of all of it is a lot of these things are spirals between the mind and the body. You start thinking a negative thought and it makes you feel a certain way, and that drives the negative thought more. And so often we're kind of spectators. We're just kind of feeling this kind of creep up. What I try to do in the course, the reason it's called mind control, is I try to convince you, you can get in there. You don't have to let it spiral. You can say, okay, there's something in my mind right now that's a negative thing and it's causing this to happen. I want to replace it. And which is sort of the idea. We can only have so much on our mind at once. So if we can push something else in, then that negative thing we don't want goes out. And that's sort of the moral of all this. And so I hope people learn that this is not voodoo. This is not anything, you know, really kind of creepy Freudian, Jungian, whatever.
Yes.
This is just very simple. Hey, if you got anxiety in your mind, watch just for laughs. Sing a song from the Beatles. Do something else to replace that, and you can push it out. And if people learn these things now, and I highly encourage families to involve their children, learn these things together, then they can have these in their back pocket as we go forward and future challenges hit. We can be literally better equipped. So I think this is sort of like the boot camp time when we're all like, oh my goodness, we need to learn some skills. Well, let's learn them, and we could come out the better for it. So that's a very positive spin on it. But I also hope a lot of the stigma against mental health, that people who are now feeling anxious might say, okay, well, let me learn a little bit, and maybe they'll realize that there really isn't a good reason for a lot of that stigma, that these are just good hygienic ways of learning how to condition our body and condition our mind so that we're maximally effective.
Absolutely. And I think we've talked about this before as well. Mental health is health. It's not separate from your physical health, because as we've seen, the mental health issues can lead to physical symptoms as well. So it's all connected, and mental health is very much just health.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, we can split even when we talk about mental health, where there are the schizophrenias and things like that, which have a very physical component, where there is something biological disease-like going on. But the emotional disorders that we have, the depressions, the anxieties, most of that is the normal system that just kind of gets a little off the rails and can be brought back on the rails. And so, those are especially the ones where I would encourage people a little bit of learning about how this stuff works and how your machinery works, and you can suddenly take control of that machinery rather than just being a passenger.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're running out of time a little bit, but I'll try and get to a couple more here. DJ asks, how would you suggest to deal with the worry about elder parents or relatives catching the virus, or the uncertainty of when you can safely see them in person and even give them a hug?
Yeah, I mean, my mom is in a long-term care facility in New Brunswick, so I know that well. We've had discussions about what happens if COVID gets in there, so I share that worry. I know that situation. It's hard to know what we can do because we are literally being kept distance. If you can connect with them, obviously socially, if you can use a phone or something like that, do that as much as you possibly can. You probably cannot physically see them. There is the hope. We're seeing this in New Brunswick of these so-called bubble families that they're starting to have. So there's this potential hope that you could form a bubble with your parent and include them in your group of isolating people, and then you can visit them and they could visit you. If that's practical given their situation, that's a sort of hope on the horizon for that hug that you talk about. But until then, you got to find other ways of hugging them. And really what a hug is all about is telling that person you love them, you're there for them. And so it's a matter of finding other ways of doing that now. Oh, I've lost your audio. Did you?
Oops, muted. Yeah. That's what live video is all about. All right, so we have one coming in from Misha. Misha asks, what kind of a mindset shift do you recommend to those of us who worry about near-term uncertainty? I worry about how long it has been and how long it will be, again, before I get to travel and see my mother. This weighs heavily on my mind. And despite being, very grateful for everything, that she's safe and financially stable here, she's anxious all the time about when she's going to be able to go back home, I think, to India and see her mother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where all of us are. We at some level just anxious about what the future world is going to look like, and are we going to be able to do a lot of the things that we took for granted before. I wouldn't so much say a mind shift as I would say a mind break. You can't stop those anxieties. The brain wants to predict the future. The brain wants to know how things are going to play out. Yeah. And we're just in a situation now where that's impossible. So our brains are not going to be happy about it. But it's when that becomes chronic, if that is on your mind constantly, that's when it becomes a potential problem. It can actually compromise your immune system if you worry and are anxious too long. So it's really a question of accepting that I'm going to worry about this a little bit, but I don't want to worry about it all the time. I want to find ways of getting my head in other places, and maybe even in some positive places. Some of us sometimes even feel guilty if we're happy now.
Yes.
Because it's like, we shouldn't feel happy. No, you should feel happy. If things make you feel happy right now, embrace those things. And again, see them as medicine, see them as an opposite of whatever. And so if she can find some things like that, things that make her laugh, things that make her smile, then get yourself in front of that and let that do the work. Try to just let that come into your mind and let it push the thing out naturally.
Right.
It's almost a question of not focusing on the negative stuff, trying to find the good stuff and surrounding yourself with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and this is a heavier question,
All right.
but definitely one I think that needs addressing. D asks, death seems more imminent now. How can I balance my fear of illness or death with living life to the fullest?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, I think many of us have to appreciate that for the older population, especially the 70 plus, this is really scary. I mean, we're all scared because of the uncertainty and all the whatever, but for many people, this could be mortal. Coming in contact with that virus could be it. And it could be for any of us, of course. What we often say, I remember a book I read as a kid called Tsunami, about this tsunami taking out a Japanese town. I would almost recommend people read that right now, because the real moral of the book, the way it was written, was from these sorts of disasters comes a true appreciation of the fragility of life and the preciousness of life. And I think that's the moral we got to get to from this, is that we've got some challenging times ahead. I mean, we've been sort of building this up for a while with environmental issues and all of these things. And we're going to get hit with a number of things. But we have to kind of appreciate those silver linings in between, and use those. It's almost like the threat of death is the best thing for making you appreciate life, perhaps. As long as you don't worry about it and let it consume you, you just kind of accept, what, death's going to come, and it could come even sooner than I thought. So what's important to me? It's a good time to think, what do I want? What's of value to me, and how can I fill my life with that value between now and then? And I think one of the interesting conversations that's happening now, we hear the term back to normal. There's a lot of people that are bristling at that phrase and saying, we don't want to go back, and maybe normal wasn't so great anyway.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time to go forward to better. And to start thinking about what that better would look like for us. And we now know that threat. So maybe it's less about money and career, and maybe it's more about, family and love, and surrounding ourselves or whatever. But I think it's a good time for us all to be reflective and to think about what kind of world and what kind of life do we want to be living post-COVID, and kind of, having those deep reflective thoughts. I think they could be very valuable.
Absolutely. So we're almost out of time. I just want to wrap up again by saying, like we said, this is Mental Health Awareness Week. One of the questions that we got a little earlier on was, how can you be a good ally to somebody that has mental health issues? Perhaps you don't feel the anxiety so much right now, but you know that people in your family, in your friend circle, are going through a lot. How can you be there? How can you let them know that they can reach out, even though for the most part, when you're going through depression or anxiety, you don't feel like you can reach out? How can you be that good ally for them?
So I'm going to almost give you the same answer I gave with the teacher, parents being a teacher. If you can go on the quest with them, and show and do it in a way of interest, not like, oh, poor thing, you're suffering from whatever. I mean, the first thing I would do is, and I do this, I admit I feel some of this as well. And these are all a continuum. Like we all, I don't think there's any of us that's like super Jamaican chill right now, just kind of relaxing. We're all somewhere on that continuum. Some people may be further along. But being able to admit to that person, I feel some of that too. Why don't we learn about this together? Why don't we figure out why we feel like this? Why don't we look into whether there's strategies? And if it's we and not you, then it feels different. It feels like you're solving a problem together, not I'm solving your problem. That feels a little pettying. It feels a little whatever, but us figuring this out together is empowering. And it gives them a real ally, especially when you learn certain strategies. For example, this guided relaxation, you could literally say, hey, did you do your guided relaxation thing today? I'm doing mine now. And there's all of this stuff will be good for anybody. So to learn these tricks will help you, even if you're the most together person in the world. It's like, asking somebody who's physically fit to do a little more exercise is not a problem for that person. And so that's what I would suggest. The real ally goes through it with you. And if you can do that and be very open, listening to what they say, it's another thing I always throw out. So often we want to talk and not listen to the other person. If you can listen, and the best way to listen is to repeat back to them in better terms what they said, to show them you listen. Oh, I see. So this is how you feel better. Oh, okay. All right. When you just say that to somebody, you're like, I get it. I get your perspective. I may not share it, but I understand what you're saying. And so that listening is a big part of some therapies, client-centered therapies, humanistic therapies, and it's a very powerful tool in general.
And a lot of the times I think listening is the crux of it, right? You don't necessarily have to offer a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, some of these therapeutic techniques are all just about listening and kind of a very simple bounce back. Oh, what else could you have tried? Oh, how do you think that would have worked? But allowing the other person to explore the problem space, kind of go through it and ultimately say, well, maybe I should have done that. Do you think that would have worked better? Well, I think it might have. Should you try that next time? Maybe I will. But now it's there, you're not saying do X, Y, or Z. Right. You're saying what feels right to you, what's good to you. And so it's more about being a sounding board and yeah, listening, showing you're listening, letting the other person kind of steer the conversation. Extremely powerful. It is what we call being a great friend.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great note to end our chat. Thank you so much, Professor Joordens, for joining us today. And once again, for everybody that tuned in, as I said, this is the beginning of Mental Health Awareness Week. We will have this entire chat on our website and on Facebook as well for you to check back in and listen to Dr. Joordens' lovely advice. Thank you again, Professor Joordens. This was a lovely chat, and good luck with everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dee. I appreciate it.
All righty. Bye-bye.